Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
It's our health unit for the month of September, and today we're talking about something called adolescence, when you change from a child into an adult and all those changes that go on with your body. We're going to be focusing specifically on your voice changing, and oftentimes we think about boys getting deeper voices at a certain age, but girls' voices change too during this time.A
little bit, yeah. Some of those voices don't get very low though for some of the girls. I've heard some really high voices here. But yeah, if you go back and listen to yourself as a kid, you'll hear that your voice was definitely different. I had a nephew who was older than his sister, but.When they'd answer the phone, I couldn't tell their voices apart. And my nephew used to get mad at me because he'd say, I'm a boy, can't you hear? But no, actually, kids, when they're young, boys and girls sound very similar to us. So
Yeah, I have some old tape recordings of me when I was pre-adolescent, I guess.
Yeah.
Pre-puberty, and my voice was pretty high. But of course, now it's lower and has been for many years. But again, this might be something that some of our students...is going through your changing voice. So let's talk about that. A changing voice is part of growing up. Let's read the entire article now from top to bottom. Adolescents experience many physical changes as they transform from children into adults. A noticeable characteristic of a mature adult is a voice with a low, deep sound.Why do our voices change as we age? To answer this, we must first learn how the mechanism of the human voice operates. People create sounds when they push air through their throats, voice boxes, and vocal cords. Air makes the vocal cords vibrate, which generates sounds. As children grow, their vocal cords also grow, and their voice boxes descend lower in their necks. Longer, thicker vocal cords produce sounds of a lower pitch.At birth, girls' and boys' vocal cords are comparable in length. However, boys' vocal cords grow almost twice as much in length as girls do annually. While teenage boys have a more dramatic voice transformation, teenage girls' voices also get deeper. Another factor that alters our voices is the male sex hormone testosterone. Both boys and girls have this hormone. However, boys produce much more of it.The increase in testosterone leads their vocal cords to lengthen and thicken. Eventually, the vocal cord growth reaches a maximum length that's longer in boys than girls. That's why men have a tendency to have lower voices than women. This process commonly happens between 10 and 14 years old for girls and 12 and 18 years old for boys. A complete voice shift may take a few months to a few years.Most boys' voices cannot help but crack and make squeaking noises during puberty. Changes in size, shape, and thickness can disrupt vocal cord movements when people speak. This makes the muscles more likely to suddenly tighten, which results in a crack. There's no need for anxiety if this issue happens to you. A cracking voice is completely normal and an indication that you're developing as you should.Okay,
guys, let's get started. We're talking about our changing voices and how it's a part of growing up. As you know, when you're young, you have that really kind of high voice. That's very cute, I must say. I love those. But then as you get older and you go through your puberty years, sometimes your voice will start changing when you're 10, sometimes 11, 12, and sometimes you'll wait as long as 14.I know that's hard for some of the guys in junior high when their voice hasn't changed yet, but yet their friends' voices have changed, so they sound kind of, kind of young, kind of high, but it will happen for everyone. Tom and I are particularly concerned about our voices because that's how we make a living. So it's kind of nice to learn more about it, though, and how our vocal cords, that's the muscle that we use to speak with, how it changes as we get older.
Right. So, of course, as you're growing up, you go through various changes. And yes, indeed, in high school or junior high, of course, some of the guys got deep voices and some don't. Some guys have facial hair, some guys don't. So it can be kind of an intimidating time to be growing up, but you'll change eventually, and it's nothing to be afraid of. Here in the first paragraph, it says, adolescents experience many physical changes as they transform from children into adults. So that's what adolescence is, the period of changing from children into adults. And if you are a person who is going through that, then you are an adolescent. An adolescent, again, a person roughly between the ages of 12 and 16 or 18 or so. Again, you're changing from a child into an adult.
So there is a noticeable change. It says here it's a noticeable characteristic of a mature adult is someone, at least a guy at least, with a low, deep-sounding voice. So why do our voices change as we age? We're going to find out. To answer this, we must first learn how the mechanism of the human voice operates. When you talk about the mechanism of something, it's just how it technically is operating or what happens to make something actually operate. So how does our human voice operate? How do we get the sound that comes out of us? Well, people create sounds when they push air through their throats. And then through your voice box and vocal cords. You need a voice box. I had a friend who sadly had throat cancer, and they had to remove the voice box, which is really tough, because then you need some technical ability to help you produce a sound. Sometimes they can give you a automated voice or a machine-like voice. Now, the vocal cords, again, they're a muscle. And I was saying to somebody that I was talking to about singing, if you don't practice, your vocal cords show it. So if you're a singer, you have to practice to become better and better. If you don't practice, you actually get worse, just like sports. If you don't use your muscles, they become weak and you're not very good.
Exactly. If you don't walk every day, you might forget how to walk as well. So again, if you're a singer, you need to exercise your vocal cords, and they are part of the voice box, which is in your throat, and air makes the vocal cords vibrate, which generates sounds. So again, the air goes through your throat, past the vocal cords, and then the vocal cords will vibrate as air is passing through them. To vibrate means to move back and forth and cause sound. So if you strike a guitar string, then the guitar string will be moving back and forth rather quickly. You probably can't see that because it's moving so fast, but it's vibrating, and because it is vibrating, it is producing sound, and that's what happens with the vocal cords. I think it's kind of like if you blow across a piece of paper or something like that from the side, it kind of makes a sound. I think that's similar to the mechanism of the vocal cords.
Or how that actually happens, yeah. So as children grow, their vocal cords also grow, and their voice boxes descend lower in their necks. Especially if you look at a guy, you can see that Adam's apple. It's in that area. It kind of moves down. Well, this happens in those longer, thicker vocal cords produce sounds of a lower pitch. A pitch is how high or low a sound is. If you're a singer and someone says, ooh, your pitch is flat or your pitch is too high, you're singing out of tune. So you adjust the pitch so that it's right. So at birth, girls and boys' vocal cords are comparable in length. Comparable means similar. You can also pronounce this word comparable, and that might be easier for some of you because it's closer to that word compare, which is a verb. But you'll often hear foreigners pronounce it comparable, so you kind of need to learn both pronunciations.
Exactly. So they're similar in length, basically, when boys and girls are born. But, of course, as they grow older, boys' vocal cords will grow almost twice as much in length as girls do annually. So if you take a measuring stick, if you take a ruler and stick it down your throat and you measure your vocal cords, I don't think they'll measure it that way, of course. But, yeah, you will notice that The boys' vocal cords do grow twice as much as the girls' do. So, for example, if the girls' vocal cords grow 2 millimeters in a year, then the boys will grow 4 millimeters in a year, at least according to this formula, growing twice as much in length as girls do every year.
So it says here, though they do grow twice as much, it happens annually. Annually is one of our vocab words, guys. Annually just means happening once a year. Sometimes we'll use it, of course, mostly as an adjective. An annual parade or an annual health checkup or an annual party or your anniversary happens annually or once a year. So while teenage boys have a more dramatic voice transformation just means to change completely from one form to another. Teenage girls' voices also get deeper. Some don't deepen very much, and some really have a voice change so that they have a very low speaking voice and maybe even singing voice. We're going to move on to the next paragraph. It says, another factor or reason, that's what a factor is, that alters or changes your voice is the male sex hormone testosterone. A hormone is something our body produces that makes our body function better. We have lots of different kinds of hormones. This is a sex hormone, so it affects our bodies in that way. It makes us have the ability to have kids as we get older. Now, testosterone is what gives us muscles. Guys have more of testosterone in their bodies, so their muscles are bigger than girls. And also, it also will maybe help that voice become lower because they have more of this testosterone. So boys produce much, much more of it, it says, and that will make their voices lower.
Right. Again, this is a hormone that both boys and girls have, but boys have more of this, hence they have bigger muscles, and they have lower voices, and they have hair on their faces, and places like that. So again, this is kind of all tied into the hormone testosterone, and I believe the opposite one is estrogen that women have more of, but this is not a genetics lesson. We're talking about voices getting deeper for both boys and girls, and we'll continue to talk about that in just a couple of seconds. Let's take a break right now and listen to our Chinese teacher.
大家好，我是派老师。今天讲解的是9月19号 Unit 10，A change in voice is part of growing up。这个单元是文意选填的练习题。好，那我们在主题解说前，老师要提醒大家，答题的时候要先看有哪些选项可以选。先大致把这些选项的词性标示出来。虽然有些字不止一种词性，但我们根据句子的结构，可以判断该题空格应该填入什么词性的单字，再根据文意找出正确的选项，会比较有效率哦。好，我们先再一起来看看这篇关于变声，人的声音为什么会改变的文意选择的题目。好，请看第一段。第一题，请直接看第一题的题干。Why do our voices change as we 空格？为何我们的声音会随着我们怎么样而改变呢？ As 是副词连接词，解释为什么的时候或随着，后面必须是个子句，但这里只有主词 we， 因此我们需要找个动词，我们再用前后文筛选。第一题正确答案是 age， 意思是为何我们的声音会随着年龄增长而改变呢？接着请看第二题，要回答这个问题，我们必须先了解人类的声音机制如何空格。How 所引导的是名词子句，在 learn 之后当作受词，然而这个名词子句只有主词 the mechanism of the human voice。名词子句由疑问词 how 所引导，但后面必须有主词，也要有动词，所以我们要再从选项里挑出一个动词。而且请记住 mechanism 是单数型，所以后面的动词必须加 s， 再用文意筛选。因此第二题正确答案是 I operate。整句话表示要回答这个问题，我们必须先了解人的声音机制是如何运作的。 再来，请看第3题。第3题这里说到，我们推动空气通过喉咙、喉头和声带时，就会发出声音。空气使声带振动，从而空格声音。先从文法来看 ，which 在此作为补述用法，补充说明前面一整个句子。Air makes the vocal cords vibrate。which 代替一整句的时候，必须视为单数，所以后面动词一样要加上 s， 再以文意挑选。第3题答案选 B，generates， 表示空气使声带振动，从而产生声音。接着第4题，出生时女生和男生的声带长度空格怎么样？ Girls and boys vocal cords 是主词，后面是 be 动词，应该加上形容词或名词当主词补语，再用前后句意筛选，所以第4题答案选 C，comparable， 可以与之相比的，表示出生时女生和男生的声带长度差不多。然后是第5题，虽然青少年有着更怎么样的声音转变，青少女的声音也会变低沉。看到 more， 我们知道要找形容词形成比较级。以前后文意作为筛选依据，第5题选 F，dramatic， 表示虽然青少年有着更戏剧性的声音转变，青少女的声音也会变低沉。再来，我们看第6题，另一个改变我们声音的空格是雄性激素睾固酮。Another 另一个后面要加名词，以文意筛选，因此第6题选 D，factor， 表示另一个改变我们声音的因素是雄性激素睾固酮。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're talking about health. Our health issue today is a changing voice, how it's a part of a growing up process. All of us go through it. If you're an adolescent out there listening to this program, you're probably thinking, yeah, some weird things are going on with my body. Lots of changes take place from the time you're a child to the time you're an adult. And most of those changes, of course, take place as we're adolescents, going from, say, age 10 to age 16, thereabouts. Some of these changes don't happen until we're actually in college. Some people keep growing taller. So changes can happen over a long stretch of time. Don't get too frustrated if the changes aren't happening for you fast enough and you're seeing your friends changing faster than you. It will happen. Just be patient. So one of the things that is interesting, though, is that when we're kids, our voices all sound the same. I've been working with some kids in singing songs, and some of my boys that are now they've turned 11. Some of them are having a harder time hitting the high notes than they did last year. So even then I can see some of the changes. And I bet some of our guys out there have had their voices kind of squeak. We're going to talk about that too.
That does happen during the transition. Remember, we did mention the word transform earlier in our lesson today.
Yeah.
Again, that's just changing from one thing to another. So yes, you make this transformation from a child to an adult, and that means you are an adolescent or you're going through adolescence. So again, we talked about the hormone testosterone. Both boys and girls have it. Boys produce a lot more of it. And, of course, this increase in testosterone leads the vocal cords to lengthen and thicken. So, of course, if something gets longer, it lengthens. And then if something gets thicker, it thickens. So, of course, sometimes you might want your soup to be a little thicker. You don't want it to be so thin, so you add maybe flour to it to thicken the soup, or whatever. You may add some thickening agent or something to make it thicker. Starch could do that too. And, of course, if you want something to be longer, you want to lengthen that thing. Maybe your dock into the lake is too short for your boat, so you lengthen the dock, you make it longer so that you can have a larger boat.
Or maybe your pants or your skirt, they're too short, so you can take out the hem that's turned up and maybe lengthen it a little bit more. Yeah, so lengthen, you take the noun length and you just add that en and it turns into a verb. Actually, it happens to quite a few English words like strength, strengthen. So if you see that en, you're probably looking at a noun that has been turned into a verb using en to lengthen, make something longer. Of course, the opposite is shorten or shorten, as we say. So make it shorter. Eventually is one of our vocab words. It just means after some time has passed, at some later time. We're not specific about the time. So it could be quite a long time that you're talking about. Or maybe, a month or two. We don't know. But eventually, in its definition, just means finally or ultimately, after some time has passed by, something takes place. And here, we're talking about the vocal cord growth reaches a maximum length that's longer in boys than girls. Maximum means as big as it's possible to become or grow. Of course, the opposite of that is minimum. Most of us are hoping that we can have our wages increase. We don't want to make the minimum wage. We want to make the maximum as we get more professional and further into our careers. So maximum just means the biggest that's possible.
And in this case, the longest that's possible, and that again is referring to the vocal cords. So the length of the vocal cords reaches a maximum length for boys, and that length will be longer in boys than in girls. Hence, you got the boys who sound like this, and the girls who sound more like this. Although it's very hard for me to sound like a girl now that my voice has gotten deep. Well, that's why men have a tendency to have lower voices than women. It's not always true. Some men don't really have particularly low voices, but most of them do. And some guys go really low. Like, I don't know if you know who Johnny Cash was, the famous American country singer who's been gone for many years now, but boy, did he have a low voice.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, my dad loved to listen to him. Very low voice. Those are kind of fun to listen to. They'll often hire those really low voices to do the movie trailers, that tell you about the movie that's coming out soon to get you all excited. So this process commonly takes place when the voice change happens between 10 and 14 if you're a girl and 12 and 18 if you're a boy. A complete voice shift. Shift just means a change from one place to another or one position to another. May take a few months to a few years. It all depends. It's different for everyone. So moving on to the final paragraph, most boys' voices cannot help but crack and make squeaking noises during puberty. Cannot help but means it's almost impossible to avoid. Cannot help but means it will happen. So those three words just means you're assured something is going to take place. Tom was talking about voices cracking. It's just kind of, sometimes. And hey, after an adult, your voice can crack sometimes too. Singers' voices, sometimes when we're singing, our voice will suddenly just quit coming out. That's a crack. And also the squeaking noises. A squeak is one of the sound words that we have in English that actually sounds like the noise that it makes. Squeak!
Like a mouse or a rat, indeed. That's rather high-pitched, of course, so as your voice is changing, you'll have these sounds coming out of your throat, and I don't really remember that happening so much. I think my transition was quite quick from having a really high voice to having a really low voice.
Was it really fast?
It was less than a year, I guess. Maybe I cracked and squeaked, I'm not quite sure, but and I don't really remember a lot of my friends making a lot of noises either, but
it seemed like it just kind of happened overnight in my family. One day my brother had a high voice and the next day it was different. It was kind of weird, yeah.
It does happen quite quickly, but again, it may not necessarily happen quickly with some people, so be patient there.
Yeah.
If you're waiting to sing bass in a barbershop quartet or something like that. But in any case, let's go on here to the next sentence. It says, changes in size, shape, and thickness can disrupt vocal cord movements when people speak. speak. So, yes, there'll be changes in the size, the shape, the thickness, etc., and they can interfere or they can disrupt the movements of the vocal cords, and that will affect how your voice sounds.
Yeah, so don't worry if you're cracking for a bit. It's kind of fun. Or we laugh at guys' voices when they crack when they're adults. We just think it's funny. And people will go, yeah, I'm going through puberty again.
Happens sometimes.
It does. Voices crack. Voices, like I said, they're a muscle and they get dry and cold and sick and whatever. So, yeah, there's no need for anxiety or worry if, you suddenly crack or make a squeaking noise. Crack we use to talk about cracking open an egg. We break something apart. That is a crack. If there's a big earthquake, sometimes the earth will crack open. That's a crack. Crack can be a noun and a verb. Here we're talking about, of course, a verb. It cannot help but crack. So, yeah, it's kind of fun to go through this period of time. Now, a cracking voice is completely normal. Don't worry about it. And it's an indication. Indication just means a sign of something that's happening, that you're developing as you should, and that's all good news.
Indeed, and of course, I think the big problem is for some boys, they may be developing slower than other boys, so you might have several classmates who already have low voices and you don't, so you'll feel intimidated and inferior, perhaps, and don't worry about that because your voice will change soon enough. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher.
再来第7题，前文提到，然而男生产生的更多。接着，高固酮空格导致他们的声带变长且增厚。这个句子的动词是 lead to 表示导致，动词前面是主词，而主词必须是名词，所以第7题答案选 H increase。整句话的意思是高固酮的增加导致他们的声带变长且增厚。接着请看第8题，完整的声音空格可能需要几个月到几年的时间。助动词 may 之前是主词的位置，也必须是名词。再根据前后文筛选，所以第8题答案选 J shift， 表示完整的声音转换可能需要几个月到几年的时间。接着请看第9题，如果这件事发生在你身上，没有什么样的必要。for 接系词后面必须接名词。根据前后文，第9题答案选 A anxiety。表示如果这件事发生在你身上，没有焦虑的必要。最后第10题，嘶哑的声音是完全正常的，而且是你正照着常态发育的空格。看到空格前的不定词或者 an， 我们知道第10题要找个单数名词，所以第10题选 G indication。这里表示嘶哑的声音是完全正常的，而且这是你正照着常态发育的迹象。谢谢大家。
That's it for today. Thanks for joining us, and please join us again next time for another interesting article that we'll talk about in our next program. So please join us then. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.